Losing everything you've built isn't just painful. It strips away who you thought you were. Troy Mallin learned this hard lesson at 52 when his ex-wife took the house, the savings, and left him with nothing but a truck and his daughter. Desperate for a fresh start, he bought an abandoned ranch in western Kansas for $1. The locals whispered warnings about the old place, but Troy had run out of options. While repairing the broken-down root cellar, he found a sealed iron lockbox hidden under a trapdoor. Inside was something that changed everything, not just about the ranch's past, but about his own future. What could be hidden in that box that would turn his life around? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Troy's hands trembled as he lifted the iron lockbox from its hiding place beneath the root cellar's warped trapdoor. The metal was cold, heavy with age and secrets. Rust had claimed the corners, but the lock remained intact, sealed tight as the day someone had buried it there. He carried it up into the fading afternoon light, setting it on the splintered porch of what was now, inexplicably, his home. The ranch house sagged against the Kansas wind like an old man too tired to stand straight. Paint had long since surrendered to the elements, leaving bare wood the color of weathered bone. Shutters hung at odd angles, and the roof showed gaps where shingles had given up their posts. It wasn't much, but then again, neither was Troy anymore. Inside the lockbox, wrapped in oilcloth gone brittle with time, lay the pieces of someone else's life. A leather journal, its pages yellowed and fragile. Photographs faded to sepia tones, showing faces Troy didn't recognize. Military medals, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, their ribbons still bright despite the years. Legal documents creased and worn from repeated folding. And beneath it all, as if placed there last for safekeeping, a bundle of letters tied with twine. Troy picked up the journal first. The leather cracked under his touch, releasing the smell of old paper and dust and something else, the particular scent of a life preserved. On the first page, written in careful script, "Property of Samuel Garrett, 1952. The name meant nothing to Troy, but the date did. 70 years ago, someone had hidden this box with care and intention. The question was why. He set the journal aside and looked at the photographs. A young man in uniform, serious-eyed and strong-jawed. The same man older, standing beside a woman with kind eyes. The two of them in front of this very house, when it was new and proud, when the porch didn't sag and the paint was fresh. When it was a home, not just a structure marking the intersection of desperation and geography. Troy heard the truck door slam. Hallie. His daughter emerged from the cab with the careful movements of someone trying not to acknowledge where they were or what had become of their lives. At 16, she'd perfected the art of silent resentment. She crossed the dirt yard without looking at him, phone clutched in her hand like a talisman connecting her to a world she'd been forced to leave behind. "Found something," Troy said. Hallie paused at the porch steps but didn't look up. "Great, more junk from someone else's garbage life." The words stung, but Troy had learned not to flinch. His daughter had earned her anger. He'd earned it for her. 25 years of marriage gone, not in an explosion but in the slow erosion of small surrenders. Linda had been patient, methodical. First the business finances. She'd always been better with numbers, she said. Then the house, putting it in her name for tax purposes, she said. Then the separate accounts, the late meetings, the distance that grew until one day Troy woke up to find himself a stranger in his own life. The divorce had been surgical. Linda's lawyer, a sharp woman in expensive suits, had dissected Troy's world with precision. The house? Linda's name was on the deed. The business. She'd documented every financial decision, every loan, every invoice, building a case that Troy was incompetent to manage affairs. The savings? Somehow, most of it had found its way into accounts he couldn't touch. He had sat in the lawyer's office. His lawyer, a tired man who seemed defeated before the fight began, listening to his life being parceled out like property at an estate sale. Hallie would live primarily with Linda. Troy would get visitation rights, carefully scheduled and monitored. He would keep his tools, his truck, and the privilege of paying support he could barely afford. "You can contest this," his lawyer had said without conviction. "But litigation is expensive, and frankly, Mr. Mallin, the way she's documented everything—" He didn't need to finish. Troy understood. He'd been outmaneuvered by someone who'd been planning this long before he knew the game had started. The construction business collapsed next. Without Linda's management, he could admit she'd been good at that part. Contracts dried up, payments lagged, suppliers lost patience. Troy had tried to hold it together, but a man can't frame a house when he's sleeping in his truck and fielding calls from creditors. Within 6 months, he'd closed the business and sold what equipment he could to pay the worst debts. Rock Bottom had a specific address, the parking lot of a Home Depot in Omaha, Nebraska, where Troy slept in his truck bed and wondered how a man could work his whole life and end up with nothing. That's when he found the listing. It was late at night, scrolling through his phone because sleep wouldn't come, when he stumbled across the real estate forum. Someone had posted it almost as a joke. Historic Kansas ranch, as is, $1 plus assumption of back taxes. The photographs showed desolation, collapsed barn, skeletal windmill, a house that looked one strong wind from surrender. But Troy saw something else. He saw a place far enough from Omaha that the wreckage of his old life couldn't follow. He saw walls that could be rebuilt, systems that could be repaired, problems that had solutions if a man was willing to work. He saw distance from pity and judgment and the particular humiliation of running into people who used to respect you. Most of all, he saw a price he could afford. The back taxes totaled $8,000. Troy had exactly $9,000 left from selling his equipment. It would clean him out completely. But what else was he going to do? Sleeping in a truck wasn't a life. It wasn't even survival. It was just waiting. He'd called the county office the next morning. The clerk sounded surprised. Someone was interested. "Sir, I should tell you that property is in rough shape. Been abandoned near 20 years. No utilities, wells probably dry. Septic's anyone's guess." "I can fix things," Troy had said. "It's pretty isolated. Nearest town is 40 minutes. Not much out there, but wind and coyotes." "That's all right." There was a pause on the line. "Well, if you're sure, we can have the paperwork ready by end of week." Telling Hallie had been harder than the divorce proceedings. They'd met at a diner, neutral territory, Linda's rules. His daughter had walked in looking like she'd rather be anywhere else on earth. She'd grown so much in the months since he'd moved out. Taller, but also harder somehow. The softness of childhood had burned away, leaving someone who looked at him like a stranger she was obligated to tolerate. "I'm moving," he'd said after they ordered. "To Kansas." Hallie had stared at him. "You're what?" "Bought a place. A ranch. It needs work, but it's a fresh start." "Are you serious? You're going to be a rancher now?" The contempt in her voice could have cut glass. "I'm going to rebuild something, make something stable." "Stable?" She'd laughed, sharp and bitter. "Like you made our family stable. Like you kept the business stable." "Hallie, Mom was right about you. You're a quitter. Things get hard and you just run away." He'd absorbed that, let it settle into the collection of failures he carried. But then he'd said the thing he'd practiced a dozen times driving to the diner. "I want you to come with me." Silence. Hallie had looked at him like he'd spoken in a foreign language. "The ranch has space. You'd have your own room. There's a school in the county seat. It's not Omaha, but it's a chance for both of us to start over. You cannot be serious." "I know it's asking a lot." "Asking a lot? Dad, You want me to leave my friends, my school, my entire life to go live in the middle of nowhere with you, in some dump that probably doesn't even have Wi-Fi. It'll have Wi-Fi, he'd said, though he had no idea if that was true. Hallie had stood up. I'm not going. But Linda, in a move Troy still didn't fully understand, had agreed. Maybe she'd grown, tired of single parenting. Maybe she wanted Hallie to see firsthand what a failure her father was, or maybe, and this was the thought that kept Troy awake some nights, maybe Linda had recognized that her daughter needed something she couldn't provide. A father who wasn't successful or impressive, just present, trying. So Hallie had come, furious and resentful, carrying 2 suitcases and the determined silence of someone marking time until escape became possible. The drive from Omaha had taken 6 hours. Troy had tried conversation at first, pointing out landmarks, mentioning the town they'd been talking about his plans for the property. Hallie had responded with grunts and silence, her phone a barrier between them. By the 3rd hour, Troy had given up, letting the planes roll past in silence broken only by the truck's engine and the wind. When they'd pulled up to the ranch, Hallie's first words in 100 miles had been, "You've got to be kidding me." Troy hadn't blamed her. In the harsh light of late afternoon, the place looked worse than the photos. The house listed like a ship taking on water. The barn had partially collapsed, its frame exposed like ribs. Tumbleweeds had claimed the yard, and the fence line had dissolved into a perimeter of tilted posts and rust. It needs work, Troy had admitted. It needs a bulldozer. But they'd moved in anyway because there was nowhere else to go. Troy had cleared 1 bedroom for Hallie, hauling out decades of debris and scrubbing surfaces until they were safe if not clean. He'd set up her bed, salvaged from a thrift store in the county seat, and helped her unpack while she radiated fury. His own bedroom was smaller, just enough space for a cot and his tools. He'd spent the first night lying awake, listening to the house settle and creak, wondering if he had made a catastrophic mistake or the first right decision in years. The elderly neighbor, Martha Sykes, had appeared the next morning like a ghost materializing from the prairie. She was small, bent with age, but her eyes were sharp as she surveyed Troy from the property line. "You're the fool bought this place," she'd said without preamble. "Yes, ma'am. Troy Mallin. Martha Sykes. Live a mile east." She'd looked past him at the house. "Shame what happened here. Used to be something fine." You knew the previous owners. Something had crossed her face then. Pain or memory or both. Long time ago. Before it all went wrong. She'd studied him with unsettling intensity. What brings a man all the way out here for $1 and a prayer? Fresh start, Troy had said. Martha had nodded slowly. Sometimes that's what a place offers. Sometimes it offers something else entirely. She'd turned to leave, then paused. "Word of advice, Mr. Mallin. If you start finding things, old things, might be best to let them stay lost. Some history's better left buried." At the time, Troy had thought she was talking about literal buried treasure, the kind of rural legend old-timers tell to entertain themselves. Now, looking at the lockbox and its contents spread across the porch, he wondered what Martha knew that she wasn't saying. Troy picked up the journal again, opening it carefully. The first entry was dated March 15th, 1952. Started the partnership with Jacob today. Signed the papers in town, split everything 50-50 like we agreed. Jacob says we're going to build an empire out here. Says the land has potential most folks can't see. I believe him. He's got vision, that one. Together, we're going to make this ranch something special. The handwriting was confident, optimistic. Troy recognized the tone. He'd felt that way once, starting his business, believing hard work and fair dealing were enough. He flipped through more pages. Entries about cattle purchases, fence repairs, water rights negotiations. The mundane accounting of building something from nothing. But as the dates progressed, The tone shifted. Small notes of concern appeared. Jacob's been taking trips to the city, says he's meeting investors, setting up sales channels. Won't give me much detail. Says I should trust him on the business end while I focus on the ranch work. Later. Found some discrepancies in the cattle count. Jacob says it's just sloppy record keeping, but I counted twice. We're short at least 20 head from what the books show. And later still, confronted Jacob about the missing cattle. He got angry, said I was questioning his integrity. Maybe I am. But something's not right. Money's going out that doesn't match what's coming in. Troy looked up from the journal. The sun had dropped toward the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of amber and rust. Hallie had gone inside, probably to her room, probably to text friends about how miserable her life had become. But Troy stayed on the porch, reading Samuel Garrett's words and seeing his own life reflected back. The trust that turned out to be misplaced, the slow realization that someone you believed in was stealing from you. The anger and confusion when confrontation revealed not remorse, but hostility. Different decades, different details, same betrayal. He read until the light failed and he had to squint at the pages. The journal entries grew darker, more worried. Samuel had discovered something serious, something worth documenting in careful detail. But the journal ended abruptly, mid-entry, as if Samuel had been interrupted and never returned. The last entry was dated October 12, 1953. Tomorrow, I confront Jacob with everything I found. I have the proof now, documentation he can't explain away. If he won't make this right, I'll take it to the authorities. This is still my ranch, too. Still my name on the partnership. I won't let him steal what we built. Martha thinks I should be careful, says Jacob's got a temper when he's cornered. But what else can I do? A man has to stand up for what's right, even when it costs him. The entry ended there. No signature. No final thoughts. Just an abrupt stop like a sentence cut short. Troy closed the journal and sat in the gathering darkness. Somewhere out in the prairie, a coyote called, lonely and wild. The wind moved through the broken barn with a sound like breathing. He thought about Samuel Garrett, who'd trusted the wrong person and paid a price Troy could only guess at. He thought about the lockbox, hidden carefully in the cellar as if Samuel had known he might not get another chance to tell his story. He thought about fresh starts and whether they were really possible, or if the past always found ways to follow. Inside the house, a light came on in Hallie's window. His daughter, trapped in a life she hadn't chosen, angry at a father who'd failed to protect her from the consequences of his own failures. Tomorrow he'd start repairs. He'd fix what could be fixed, rebuild what could be rebuilt. He'd make this wreck of a ranch into something livable, prove to Hallie and to himself that starting over was more than just running away. But tonight, he sat with a dead man's journal and wondered what Samuel Garrett had discovered in those final days and whether some ghosts demanded more than being left in peace. The iron lockbox sat beside him, its remaining contents unexplored. Tomorrow for that too. Tonight was for reading and remembering and understanding that he wasn't the first man to bet everything on a piece of Kansas prairie and hope it would be enough. Troy picked up one of the photographs. Samuel and the woman, younger, happy, their whole lives ahead of them, and felt the weight of time and loss and lives that don't turn out the way they're supposed to. He'd come here for a fresh start, but maybe what he'd found was something else entirely. A mystery, a responsibility, a chance to finish something a better man had started 70 years ago. The wind picked up, rattling the loose boards of the porch. Troy gathered the lockbox contents carefully, treating them with the respect they deserved, and carried them inside where they'd be safe. Tomorrow, the work would begin. But tonight belonged to Samuel Garrett and whatever story he'd been trying to tell. The morning came with a kind of light that makes the prairie look endless. Troy woke to silence so complete it felt like pressure against his eardrums. No traffic sounds, no neighbors, no city hum. Just wind and space and the settling sounds of an old house waking up. He found Hallie already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her phone, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. She didn't look up when he entered. "Morning," Troy offered. A grunt in response. Progress in its way. Troy made coffee on the camp stove he'd set up. The house's electrical system was a project for later, and stood at the window looking out at his domain. In daylight, the work ahead seemed more manageable. The barn could be stabilized, the fence could be repaired. The house itself had good bones underneath the decay. A man, with tools and time, could make something of this place. "I'm going to start on the cellar today," Troy said. "Get it cleared out so we can use it for storage." Hallie said nothing, but her fingers stopped moving across the screen. She was listening. "Found that lockbox down there yesterday. Belongs to the guy who owned this place back in the 50s. Samuel Garrett." Still nothing, but Troy could feel her attention now. He was in some kind of partnership that went bad. Sounds like his partner might have stolen from him. Troy sipped his coffee. "Reminds me of some things, reading his story." Hallie looked up then, just for a moment, and Troy saw something in her face that wasn't quite anger. Maybe curiosity. Maybe understanding that her father's failures weren't entirely his fault. The look passed quickly, and she went back to her phone, but it had been there. Troy spent the morning in the cellar, clearing out debris by wheelbarrow loads. Mice had made nests in the corners, and spider webs draped the beams like tattered curtains. The work was dirty and hard, but it felt good to move, to accomplish something tangible. By noon, he'd cleared 2/3 of the space. That's when he found the watch. It was wedged between floorboards near the back wall, partially hidden by decades of dust. Troy almost missed it, would have missed it if the metal hadn't caught the light from his work lamp at just the right angle. He worked it free carefully, using a screwdriver to pry up the board edge. The watch was silver, tarnished black in places, but still intact. A pocket watch, the kind men carried in the days before wristwatches became standard. Troy rubbed the face with his thumb, clearing away grime, and saw that it had stopped at 3:47. Morning or evening, there was no way to know. He turned it over. On the back, an engraving, S.G. to J.M., brothers in arms. Samuel Garrett to Jacob Miller, the partner, the thief. Troy sat back on his heels, holding the watch in his palm. Why would a gift from Samuel to Jacob end up wedged in the cellar floorboards? Had Jacob dropped it during some visit? Had there been a confrontation here? A struggle? The watch felt heavy with implication. Troy slipped it into his pocket and continued working, but his mind was elsewhere, turning over possibilities. That afternoon, Martha Sykes appeared again. She walked the property line like it was a border that couldn't be crossed without permission, waiting for Troy to notice her. When he did, he waved her over. "Mrs. Sykes, can I offer you some water? Coffee?" "Water's fine." She followed him to the porch, moving with the careful steps of someone whose bones hurt but whose pride wouldn't acknowledge it. Troy brought out 2 glasses and sat beside her. They drank in silence for a moment, watching the prairie grass bend under the wind. "Found something today," Troy said, pulling out the watch. "Thought you might know something about it." Martha took the watch, and the color drained from her face. Her hands trembled as she turned it over, reading the inscription. "Where did you find this?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Cellar, wedged between floorboards." Martha's jaw tightened. She stared at the watch like it was a snake that might strike. When she finally spoke, her voice carried decades of weight. "Samuel gave this to Jacob on the day they signed their partnership. I remember because Samuel was so proud, so sure he'd found a good man to build something with." She handed the watch back like it burned to hold. "You should put this away, Mr. Mallin. Forget you found it." "Why?" "Because some stones are better left unturned. What happened here, it's old business, old grief, so digging it up won't change anything. Troy leaned forward. What did happen here, Mrs. Sykes? The journal ends suddenly in 1953. Samuel was planning to confront Jacob about stealing, then nothing. What happened? Martha stood, steadying herself against the porch rail. Samuel Garrett disappeared in October of '53, left his truck, his belongings, everything. Jacob Miller said Samuel ran off with money from the ranch accounts, said he'd been skimming profits, and finally got scared when Jacob caught on. You don't believe that? Doesn't matter what I believe. That's the story that went into the records, the story the town accepted. But the watch proves nothing except it ended up in a cellar. Martha's voice was sharp now, defensive. Jacob Miller claimed Samuel gave him the watch back, said it was conscience money before he ran. Could have dropped it during a visit here, could have a dozen explanations. Could be Samuel never left at all. The words hung between them. Martha's face went hard. You need to understand something, Mr. Mallin. Jacob Miller died 30 years ago, but his family didn't. His grandson, Cole Miller, owns half this county. The bank, the feed store, sits on the county commission. The Millers have deep roots here. You start making accusations about things that happened before you were born, you'll make powerful enemies. I'm not looking to make enemies. I'm just trying to understand. Then understand this. Martha's eyes were fierce. I've lived here 70 years. I knew Samuel. I knew Jacob. And I'm telling you, for your own good and your daughter's, let sleeping dogs lie. She left then, moving faster than Troy would have thought possible for someone her age. He watched her go, the watch still in his hand. That evening, Hallie came out to the porch where Troy sat reading more of Samuel's journal. She didn't say anything, just stood there, and Troy recognized it as an opening. That old woman seemed upset, Hallie said finally. Yeah. Showed her something I found. Troy held up the watch. It belonged to the man who used to own this place. Hallie took it, examining the inscription. Brothers in arms, like soldiers, like partners, or what they thought was a partnership. What happened to him? Troy told her then about Samuel and Jacob, about the journal entries and the missing cattle and the confrontation that was planned but apparently never happened, about how Samuel disappeared and was never seen again. So his partner killed him? Hallie's voice was matter-of-fact, the way teenagers talk about distant tragedies that don't touch their own lives. Maybe. Or maybe he really did run away. But Mrs. Sykes says his truck was still here. His belongings. People don't usually run away from their lives without taking their truck. Hallie turned the watch over in her hands. Why do you care? It's not your problem. Troy thought about that. Why did he care? Samuel Garrett was a stranger, dead or vanished 70 years ago. It had nothing to do with rebuilding a ranch or making a home for his daughter. Maybe because reading his journal feels like reading my own story, Troy said slowly. A man who trusted someone, who got betrayed, who tried to stand up for what was right and paid a price for it. Hallie looked at him then, really looked at him, and Troy saw his daughter considering whether her father's failures had been entirely his fault or if he'd been cheated, same as Samuel. What are you going to do? She asked. I don't know yet. Mrs. Sykes says I should leave it alone. Do you always do what old ladies tell you? Troy almost smiled. Usually not. Hallie handed back the watch and went inside, but something had shifted. For the first time since Omaha, she'd asked him a question that wasn't loaded with contempt. She'd listened to his answer like it mattered. That night, Troy couldn't sleep. He lay on his cot, listening to the house creak, thinking about Samuel Garrett and Jacob Miller and a watch that had stopped at 3:47. He thought about Martha's warning and the fear in her eyes when she'd seen the watch. He thought about powerful families and old secrets and whether truth mattered after 70 years. Around midnight, he got up and lit the camp lantern. He went back to the lockbox and examined everything again. The journal, the photographs, the medals, the documents. He laid it all out on the floor like pieces of a puzzle. One photograph caught his attention. Samuel and Jacob, younger, standing in front of the barn when it was new, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. Brothers in arms indeed. Before the betrayal, before the theft, before whatever happened that made Samuel disappear and Jacob inherit everything. Troy studied Jacob Miller's face in the photograph. A handsome man, confident, the kind of person you'd trust. The kind of person who could smile at you while planning how to take everything you had. Like Linda's lawyer, like the people who'd sympathized with Troy's situation while working behind the scenes to dismantle his life. He picked up the journal and read the final entry again. Samuel had proof. Documentation that Jacob couldn't explain away. He'd planned to confront Jacob and, if necessary, go to the authorities, but the journal ended there. And Samuel disappeared, and somehow Jacob Miller ended up with the ranch, the business, everything. Troy thought about the cellar where he'd found the watch, about how the lockbox had been hidden so carefully, about how a man planning to run away doesn't hide evidence. He takes it with him. The pieces began to form a picture Troy didn't like but couldn't ignore. Samuel Garrett hadn't run away. He'd been silenced, and 70 years later, his story was still trapped in an iron lockbox, waiting for someone to care enough to listen. Troy looked toward Hallie's room, where his daughter slept behind a closed door. He thought about powerful families and the dangers of asking questions nobody wanted answered. He thought about Martha's warning and knew she was right. Pursuing this could bring trouble. But he also thought about a man who'd stood up for what was right and paid the ultimate price. About a story that deserved to be told, even if telling it was inconvenient or dangerous. For the first time since the divorce, Troy felt something other than defeat. He felt purpose. Maybe it was borrowed purpose, standing in for a dead man's fight. But it was something to hold on to, something that mattered beyond just surviving one more day. He gathered the lockbox contents carefully and placed them in the corner of his room. Tomorrow he'd start asking real questions. He'd find out what happened to Samuel Garrett, why Jacob Miller's watch ended up in a cellar, and whether justice could reach across 70 years. The watch sat on his makeshift nightstand, its hands forever frozen at 3:47. Troy looked at it one last time before blowing out the lantern. "Brothers in arms," the inscription said. But brother had betrayed brother, and the evidence was still here, still waiting, still demanding someone give a damn. Troy closed his eyes and, for the first time in months, slept without the weight of his own failures crushing his chest. He had someone else's fight to take up, and maybe, in fighting for a dead man's honor, he'd find a way to reclaim his own. The next morning, Troy woke with a sense of direction he hadn't felt in months. He made coffee and found Hallie already at the kitchen table, Samuel's journal open in front of her. "You're reading it," Troy said. "Couldn't sleep." Hallie didn't look up from the page. "This guy, Samuel, he sounds like he really believed in his partner, kept giving him chances even when things didn't add up." Troy sat across from her. "Sounds familiar. Mom always said you were too trusting." Hallie turned a page. "I used to think she meant you were stupid, but reading this, I don't know. Maybe being trusting isn't the same as being stupid." It was the closest thing to sympathy Hallie had offered since Omaha. Troy didn't push it, just sipped his coffee and let the moment settle. "There's more in that lockbox," Troy said. "Legal documents. Haven't looked at them carefully yet." Together they spread the contents across the table. Among the papers, Troy found what he was looking for, a partnership agreement dated January 15, 1951. The document was formal, notarized, splitting ownership of the ranch and cattle operation 50-50 between Samuel Garrett and Jacob Miller. But it was the margin notes that made Troy's pulse quicken. In Samuel's handwriting, penciled annotations ran down the sides of several pages. Small notations at first: verify cattle count. JM says 247 head, but I counted 229. Then more detailed: payment to Stockman's trust doesn't match invoice, short about $200. The notes grew more urgent toward the end. JM refusing to show full books, says I should focus on ranch work, let him handle business, but numbers don't add up. Money going out doesn't match income. Where is it going? And finally, underlined twice, missing $8,500 over 6 months. Confronted JM today. He got angry, said I was questioning his integrity, but I know what I see. He's stealing from our partnership. Troy read the notes aloud while Hallie listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. So he had proof, Hallie said. Jacob was stealing from him. Looks that way. And then Samuel disappeared right before he was going to expose it. According to the journal, yeah. Hallie closed the journal carefully. Dad, this isn't just some old mystery. If what you're thinking is true, if Jacob killed Samuel to cover up the theft, it's been 70 years. Everyone involved is probably dead. Mrs. Sykes said Jacob's grandson still lives here, owns half the county. Hallie met his eyes. If you start digging into this, you're going to make enemies. Troy thought about that, about Martha's warning and Hallie's concern and the sensible thing to do, which was put the lockbox away and focus on rebuilding the ranch and staying out of trouble. But he also thought about Samuel's final journal entry about a man preparing to stand up for what was right, even though he was afraid. Maybe enemies are worth making if the cause is right, Troy said. Hallie studied him with an expression Troy couldn't quite read. Then she stood and went to her room, returning with a notebook. If we're doing this, we need to be organized. She opened the notebook to a fresh page. We should make a timeline, figure out exactly what happened when. Troy felt something shift in his chest. His daughter had just aligned herself with him for the first time since the divorce. They spent the next hour creating a timeline from the journal entries and documents. The partnership formed in January 1951. Samuel's first concerns appeared in his journal in March 1952. By June 1953, he documented clear evidence of theft. The final entry was October 12, 1953, the day before Samuel planned to confront Jacob. We need to know what happened after that, Hallie said. How did Jacob explain Samuel's disappearance? What did the authorities do? County records, Troy said. There must be property, records, police reports, something official. That afternoon, they drove to the county seat, a small town 40 minutes away, called Ashford. The county courthouse was an old limestone building that had probably been impressive in 1920, but now just looked tired. The clerk in the records office was a woman in her 60s who looked up from her computer with practiced disinterest. Help you? Looking for property records, Troy said. The old Garrett Ranch west of here. The woman's fingers moved across her keyboard. What years? 1953 to 1955, probably. She pulled up files, scrolling through digital scans of old documents. Here we go. Property seized for unpaid taxes and debts, April 1954. Sold at auction to Jacob Miller, May 1954. What were the debts? Troy asked. The clerk clicked through pages. Says here, outstanding business loans, unpaid supplier bills, back taxes, total of $14,000. And it sold for how much? $6,000. Jacob Miller was the only bidder. Troy felt his jaw tighten. Samuel's half of a working ranch, seized and sold to his partner for less than half what was owed. Convenient. Any police reports from that time? About Samuel Garrett? The clerk's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. You'd have to talk to the sheriff's office for that. But I can tell you, I've lived here my whole life. The Garrett disappearance is old news. Settled business. Settled how? Hallie asked. The woman looked at her, then back to Troy. Samuel Garrett ran off with partnership money. Jacob Miller reported it. Tried to keep the business going, but couldn't cover Samuel's debts. Lost the ranch in the process, but at least he tried to make it right. That's the story everyone knows. And if that's not what really happened? Troy kept his voice level. The clerk's face hardened. Then you'd be calling Jacob Miller a liar, and that's a serious accusation against a respected family. The Millers have been pillars of this community for generations. I'd be careful about spreading rumors, especially if you're new here and don't understand how things work. It was a threat wrapped in advice, and Troy recognized it for what it was. They left the courthouse with copies of the property records. In the truck, Hallie was quiet until they were back on the highway. She was protecting them, Hallie said finally. Yeah. Everyone here knows the Millers. They're not going to believe some stranger showing up with questions. Probably not. So what do we do? Troy thought about the partnership agreement with Samuel's handwritten notes, about the watch in the cellar, about the journal ending so abruptly. We find more proof, he said. Enough that even the people who don't want to believe it can't look away. Where do we look? Samuel said he hid evidence where only truth seekers will look. We've found the lockbox, but I think there's more. He knew he was in danger. He wouldn't have put all his proof in one place. They drove in silence for a while, the prairie rolling past in endless waves of grass and sky. Dad? Hallie's voice was quiet. When Mom took everything, when her lawyer made it look like you were incompetent, did you fight back? Troy's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Not enough. Not the way I should have. Why not? I was tired, defeated, felt like the world had decided I was a failure, and who was I to argue? But you're fighting now, for someone you never even met. Troy glanced at his daughter. Maybe it's easier to fight for someone else than for yourself. Or maybe I needed to find something worth fighting for before I remembered how. Hallie nodded and went back to looking out the window, but her hand, resting on the seat between them, had unclenched. She wasn't angry anymore. She was thinking, processing, maybe even understanding. When they got home, Troy stood on the porch looking out at the ranch. Somewhere on this property, Samuel Garrett had hidden more evidence. A man smart enough to hide one lockbox was smart enough to create backup plans. Where would you hide something if you knew you might not survive to retrieve it? Troy said aloud. Hallie came to stand beside him. Somewhere permanent. Somewhere that wouldn't get cleared out or torn down even if the property changed hands. They looked at each other. The barn foundation, they said together. Tomorrow they'd search. Tonight, Troy read more of the journal while Hallie made notes in her notebook. Father and daughter, united for the first time in longer than Troy could remember, working together to uncover a 70-year-old truth. Outside, the prairie wind moved through the grass like whispered secrets. And somewhere, Troy hoped, Samuel Garrett's ghost was watching, grateful that someone finally gave a damn. The barn foundation was older than the house, built from limestone blocks that had weathered to the color of old bones. Troy and Hallie started their search at first light, working methodically along the perimeter. The barn itself had partially collapsed years ago, but the foundation remained solid. Whoever had built it knew their craft. The stones fit together with precision, mortar still holding in most places, despite decades of neglect. What exactly are we looking for? Hallie asked, running her hands along the blocks. Anything that doesn't belong. Loose stones, hollow spots, places where the mortar looks newer than the rest. They worked in silence, the morning sun climbing higher, heating the prairie. Troy's back ached from bending and his hands were scraped raw, but he kept going. Hallie matched him, stone for stone, section by section. It was almost noon when Hallie called out, "Dad, here." Troy hurried over. Hallie had found a section where 3 stones sat slightly recessed from the others. The mortar around them looked different, lighter in color, not as weathered. Together, they worked the stones loose. Behind them, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax, was a metal tube about 18 inches long. Troy's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside, rolled tight, was a document. He spread it carefully on the ground. It was a notarized statement dated October 10th, 1953, 2 days before Samuel's final journal entry. I, Samuel Garrett, being of sound mind, make this statement as a matter of legal record. My business partner, Jacob Miller, has been systematically stealing from our joint cattle operation. Over the past 18 months, he has engaged in the following fraudulent activities. What followed was a detailed accounting, false cattle sales where Jacob kept the money, diverted payments from buyers, forged invoices showing expenses that never existed. Each allegation included dates, amounts, and the names of witnesses who could corroborate. Should my death or disappearance occur under suspicious circumstances, the statement concluded, I ask that authorities investigate Jacob Miller thoroughly. I have hidden copies of financial records and correspondence in multiple locations on this property. The truth is here for those willing to look. The statement was notarized by a clerk in the state capitol, someone outside Jacob's sphere of influence. Troy read it twice, Hallie looking over his shoulder. This is it, Hallie said. This proves Jacob was stealing, proves Samuel knew and was going to expose him. Siam, it's evidence, Troy agreed. But it's circumstantial. It's Samuel's word against Jacob's, and Samuel's the one who disappeared. But combined with the journal, the partnership agreement, the watch, we need more. We need something that connects Jacob to Samuel's disappearance directly. Troy examined the tube more carefully. Inside, tucked in the end, was a small folded paper. He opened it. It was a hand-drawn map of the property dated 1952. But unlike a normal property map, this one showed unusual detail. Underground water channels, mineral deposit indicators, areas marked with survey stakes. In the corner, in Samuel's handwriting, true value of the land. JM knows but won't discuss. Why? Troy studied the map. Whoever had surveyed this property had found something valuable underground. The map showed what looked like significant water rights and possible mineral deposits. Dad, look. Hallie pointed to several areas marked private, JM only. Jacob was surveying parts of the property without Samuel's knowledge, Troy said slowly, probably planning to claim the mineral and water rights for himself. Could he do that? If they were 50-50 partners? If Samuel disappeared and Jacob inherited the property, he could do whatever he wanted. Troy pulled out his phone and searched for the county assessor's information. He navigated through several screens before finding what he needed. Current ownership records for mineral and water rights on the old Garrett property. The rights had been severed from the surface property decades ago. They were held by a company called Miller Resources, LLC. Of course, Troy muttered. What? The mineral and water rights. They're owned by a company with Miller in the name. I'd bet anything it's connected to Jacob's family. Hallie took the phone and scrolled through the information. It says here the rights were registered in 1954, right after the property was seized. Current value estimate. She stopped, her eyes widening. Dad, it says current value is estimated at $600,000. Troy felt something cold settle in his stomach. Jacob hadn't just stolen from the partnership. He'd orchestrated Samuel's disappearance to claim underground resources worth a fortune. We need to find out who owns Miller Resources now, Troy said. That evening, back at the house, they researched online. Miller Resources, LLC was registered to Cole Miller, grandson of Jacob Miller, the same man Martha had warned them about. The company held water rights and mineral claims throughout the county, many acquired during the 1950s when Jacob had been consolidating property. Troy sat back, the pieces falling into place. Jacob had discovered valuable underground resources on the Garrett Ranch. He'd begun stealing from the partnership to fund his own development plans. When Samuel caught on, Jacob had to eliminate him to claim everything. 70 years later, Cole Miller was still benefiting from his grandfather's crime. "We have to tell someone," Hallie said. "This isn't just ancient history. They're still using stolen property rights." "Who do we tell? The sheriff's office is going to be tight with the Miller family. The county clerk already warned us off." "What about that lawyer in town? Rebecca something?" Troy had seen a lawyer's office in Ashford. Rebecca Chen, the nameplate had said. He'd assumed she was just another small-town attorney who wouldn't want to make waves. "Worth a try," he said. The next morning, they drove to Rebecca Chen's office. It was above a hardware store accessed by exterior stairs. The reception area was small but neat, and Rebecca herself came out to meet them within minutes. She was younger than Troy expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a direct handshake. "Mr. Mallin, you called about a property matter." Troy spread out the documents on her desk. The partnership agreement, Samuel's notarized statement, the property map, the records of the seizure and sale. Rebecca read through everything carefully, making notes. When she finished, she sat back. "This is remarkable," she said. "If authentic, and it looks authentic, this suggests significant fraud in a 1950s property seizure." "Can we do anything about it?" Troy asked. "That's complicated. The statute of limitations has long passed on most criminal charges, but there might be grounds for a civil action regarding the property rights. If the seizure was fraudulent, subsequent transfers of mineral and water rights could be challenged." "What would that take?" "More evidence. What you have established is motive and opportunity, but you'd need proof that Jacob Miller was directly involved in Samuel Garrett's disappearance. A body would help. Or witness testimony placing Jacob at the scene. After 70 years. "I know." Rebecca looked sympathetic. "But here's what I can do. I can research the legal angles, see if there's a pathway to challenge the rights transfer. Meanwhile, you keep looking for evidence. Talk to old-timers who might remember something. The more you can build the case, the harder it becomes to dismiss." Troy nodded. "There's something else. Samuel said he hid evidence in multiple locations. We found this in the barn foundation. There might be more." "Then find it. And Mr. Mallin?" Rebecca's expression grew serious. "Be careful. The Miller family has deep roots here. They're not going to appreciate someone digging into their past. If you start making progress, expect pushback." As they left the office, Hallie was quiet. "What are you thinking?" Troy asked. "That we're really doing this. We're going up against a powerful family to prove a 70-year-old murder." "Having second thoughts?" "No." Hallie met his eyes. "I'm thinking this is the first time I've seen you stand up for something. Really stand up, consequences be damned." Troy put his hand on his daughter's shoulder. For the first time, she didn't pull away. They had a lawyer. They had evidence. They had purpose. Tomorrow they'd search for more hidden proof. Tonight, Troy felt something he hadn't felt in years, the conviction that he was doing something right, something that mattered. Samuel Garrett's voice echoed across 7 decades, asking for justice. And Troy Mallin, failed businessman and broken father, had found his chance at redemption. Over the next week, Troy and Hallie searched every corner of the property. They found nothing else hidden in obvious places, but Troy couldn't shake the feeling they were missing something. Martha Sykes hadn't visited since the day Troy showed her the watch. Her absence felt deliberate, like she was waiting to see how far he'd go before offering another warning. Then, on a Tuesday morning, Troy found the letters. He was clearing out the last corner of the root cellar, a section he'd avoided because the ceiling beams looked questionable. But careful probing showed them sound enough, so he worked his way in with a flashlight. Behind a loose board in the back wall, tucked into a gap between the foundation stones, was a bundle wrapped in waxed paper. Inside were letters, a dozen of them, all addressed to Samuel Garrett, all unsigned. The first was dated June 1953. You need to stop asking questions. The business is what it is. Accept your share and be grateful. The next one, from July. Your nosing around is causing problems. Some things are better left alone. Think about what you have to lose. August. This is your final warning. Drop your accusations or face consequences. You have a woman who cares about you. Consider her safety. The threats escalated with each letter. September brought explicit violence. Accidents happened to stubborn men. Fires, falls, disappearances. No one would be surprised if a rancher met a bad end. The final letter was dated October 11, 1953, one day before Samuel's last journal entry. Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., the old well. Come alone if you want to settle this. Bring your evidence if you think it matters. We'll see what truth is worth. Troy read them twice, his hands shaking. These weren't just threats. They were a murder plan laid out in writing. Jacob had lured Samuel to a meeting place, promising to settle things. Samuel had never come home. Troy photographed each letter with his phone, then carefully preserved them in a plastic bag. This was the evidence they needed, proof of premeditation, proof that Jacob had wanted Samuel silenced. He showed them to Hallie that evening. She read through them, her face growing pale. "Dad, this is a smoking gun. These letters prove Jacob threatened Samuel. Then Samuel disappeared right after agreeing to meet him." "We still don't have a body," Troy said, "or proof Jacob actually killed him. Just threats and a convenient disappearance." "The letters mention a well. The old well. Is there a well on the property?" Troy thought about it. There was the modern well he'd been using, drilled decades ago. But an old well, that could be anywhere on the acreage, long since filled in or forgotten. "We need to find it," Hallie said. Troy contacted Rebecca Chen, sending her photos of the letters. She called back within an hour. "Mr. Mallin, these are extraordinary. Combined with the notarized statement, they establish a clear pattern of threats. Any competent investigator would see these as evidence of foul play. Will the sheriff's office reopen the case?" Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "I think we need to go higher. The sheriff here, Tom Breslin, he's been in office 20 years. He's tight with the Miller family. I don't trust him to investigate objectively." "So what do we do?" "We build an airtight case and take it to the state attorney general's office. But you need something definitive. The letters and statement are compelling, but they're still circumstantial. Find the well mentioned in that final letter. Find evidence of what happened there." After the call, Troy stood on the porch looking out at his property. Somewhere out there was a well where a man had gone to his death. 70 years of wind and weather and growth had hidden it, but it was still there. The next morning, Troy drove to the county courthouse again. This time he asked for historical survey maps of the property. The clerk, the same woman who'd warned him before, was reluctant. "What do you need old surveys for?" "Property planning," Troy lied. "Want to know where the original structures were." She retrieved the maps with obvious disapproval. Troy spread them out on a table and photographed every page. Back home, he and Hallie compared the historical survey to Samuel's hand-drawn map. There, marked on both, was a well in the northeast corner of the property, about half a mile from the house. "Why would anyone put a well so far from the house?" Hallie asked. "Maybe it was there before the house was built, or maybe—" Troy stopped, a thought forming. Maybe it wasn't for the house at all. Maybe it was for cattle. Old ranches sometimes had multiple wells spread across the property. They walked to the location that afternoon, pushing through waist-high grass and brush that had reclaimed what might once have been pasture. Troy used his phone's GPS to navigate, checking their position against the survey coordinates. "Here," he said finally. They were standing in a small depression, a subtle bowl in the landscape. Nothing marked it as special, just grass and a few scraggly bushes. But when Troy kicked around in the dirt, his boot struck something solid, concrete. They spent the next hour clearing away vegetation and soil. Gradually, a concrete cap emerged, roughly 6 feet in diameter, weathered and cracked, but intact. Cast into the concrete, still legible despite decades of exposure, were words that made Troy's blood run cold. Miller Construction, 1953. "Jacob's Company," Hallie whispered. Troy knelt beside the cap, running his fingers over the lettering. Jacob Miller had sealed this well in 1953, the same year Samuel disappeared. The same year the final threatening letter had mentioned the old well. This wasn't just a well, it was a grave. "We need to call someone," Troy said. "The police, the state investigators, someone." "Will they believe us?" "With the letters, the timeline, and this..." He gestured at the concrete cap. "They'll have to at least look." But as Troy pulled out his phone, a truck appeared on the access road. A new Silverado, clean and expensive. It pulled up beside Troy's truck and a man got out. He was in his 50s, well-dressed in expensive ranch casual, designer jeans and a polo shirt that probably cost more than Troy's weekly grocery budget. His face was tanned, his hair silver at the temples, his expression confident in the way of men who've never been told no. "You must be Troy Mallin," the man said, extending his hand. "Cole Miller, I own the bank in town." Troy didn't take the hand. "I know who you are." Cole Miller's smile didn't waver, but something cold entered his eyes. "I've heard you've been asking questions about my grandfather, digging into old family business." "Just trying to understand the history of my property." "Your property?" Miller's tone made it clear what he thought of that. "Mr. Mallin, let me be direct. This ranch, this land, it has a complicated history. My grandfather worked hard to keep it viable when his partner abandoned it. He took on debt, risked everything, and eventually lost the property anyway. It's not a story the family likes revisited." "That's not what happened," Troy said. "No." Miller's expression hardened. "You've been here, what, a few weeks? And you think you understand 70 years of history better than the people who lived it? I understand that your grandfather threatened Samuel Garrett. I have the letters to prove it." The pretense of friendliness dropped away. Cole Miller's face went flat and cold. "Be very careful, Mr. Mallin. Making accusations against respected families can have consequences, legal consequences." "Is that a threat?" "It's advice. I know you're struggling financially. I know you paid practically nothing for this land. I'm prepared to offer you $50,000 to walk away. Take your daughter, start over somewhere else, and leave the past alone." "Not interested." Miller's jaw tightened. "That's unfortunate. Because if you continue this crusade, you'll find life in this county very difficult. Banks can call in loans. Building permits can be delayed. People can become unwilling to do business with troublemakers." Troy stepped forward. "Your grandfather was a thief and probably a murderer. I'm going to prove it." "With what? Some old letters in a paranoid journal? You have no body, no witnesses, nothing but the ravings of a man who disappeared rather than face his own crimes." "We have this well," Troy said, gesturing at the concrete cap. "Sealed by your grandfather's company in 1953, the same well mentioned in his final threat to Samuel." Cole Miller's eyes flicked to the cap, and for just a moment Troy saw fear. Then the mask came back. "That's trespassing evidence," Miller said. "You photographed or measured anything on my property. It's inadmissible. This isn't your property, it's mine. The mineral rights are mine, and that includes access to historical water sources." Miller pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my attorney. You're about to learn what it costs to make enemies in this county." He walked back to his truck, already dialing. Before he drove off, he rolled down the window. Last chance, Mallin. Take the 50,000 and go. Because if you stay, I will bury you. The truck kicked up dust as it accelerated away, leaving Troy and Hallie standing by the sealed well. Dad, Hallie said quietly. He's scared. He knows what's down there. Troy nodded, his heart pounding. They'd struck a nerve. Cole Miller's tough guy routine had cracked for just a moment, revealing fear underneath. That meant they were close to something real. We need to call Rebecca, Troy said, and we need to do it now, before Miller can interfere. As they walked back to the house, Troy felt the weight of what they'd started. This wasn't just about historical justice anymore. They'd made an enemy of a powerful man who had everything to lose, but they'd also found the well, and whatever secrets it held were about to come to light. Rebecca Chen drove out to the ranch that same evening. She examined the well cap, photographed it from multiple angles, and took GPS coordinates. This changes everything, she said. Combined with the threatening letters and the timeline, we have grounds for a formal investigation. Cole Miller claimed the mineral rights give him access to historical water sources. Troy said anything we found here is inadmissible. Rebecca shook her head. That's legal nonsense. This well is on your surface property. His mineral rights don't grant him access without permission, and even if they did, you can't exclude evidence of a crime based on property disputes. So what's our next move? I file a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office. I'll include all your evidence, the journal, the partnership documents, the threatening letters, and photographs of this well cap. Request they reopen the Samuel Garrett disappearance as a potential homicide. How long will that take? Hard to say. Could be weeks, could be months. State investigators move slowly. Rebecca looked at the well cap again. But given the evidence and the timeline, they'll have to respond. This is too substantial to ignore. After Rebecca left, Troy and Hallie returned to the house. The sun was setting, painting the prairie in shades of copper and gold. It should have been peaceful, but Troy felt only tension. He's going to come after us, Hallie said. Cole Miller. He's not going to just wait for investigators. I know. What can he really do? Troy thought about that. He owns the bank, controls credit, sits on the county commission. He can make it hard for us to get supplies, permits, services. Can turn the community against us. But he can't stop the investigation. No. But he can make our lives miserable while it happens. That night, Troy couldn't sleep. He lay on his cot, listening to the house settle, thinking about powerful men and how they protected their interests. Cole Miller had everything to lose if his grandfather's crimes came to light. A man in that position would do more than just make life difficult. The next morning brought the first retaliation. Troy drove to the hardware store in Ashford to pick up supplies for roof repairs. The owner, a man named Frank who'd been friendly on previous visits, met him at the door. Can't help you today, Troy. I just need some shingles and... Can't help you, Frank repeated, his face apologetic but firm. Got a call this morning. Was advised it wouldn't be good for business to serve certain customers. Cole Miller. Frank didn't confirm, but his expression said enough. Troy tried the feed store next, thinking he'd pick up some basics for the property. Same story. The owner wouldn't meet his eyes, just said they were out of stock on everything Troy needed. At the grocery store, the checker was cold where she'd been friendly before. She processed his purchase in silence, and when Troy's card was declined, she looked unsurprised. There must be a mistake, Troy said. I have money in that account. You'd have to take it up with the bank, sir. Troy drove to the bank, already, knowing what he'd find. The manager, a nervous man who'd approved Troy's small business account weeks earlier, explained that the account had been flagged for suspicious activity. What suspicious activity? I can't discuss the specifics, but until it's resolved, the account is frozen. This is Cole Miller's bank. The manager's face flushed. Mr. Miller owns the bank, yes. But these decisions are made by our fraud department following standard protocols. How long until it's resolved? Could be several days. Could be longer. Troy left the bank understanding the message. Every business in town depended on Miller in some way. Loans, accounts, investments, influence. Anyone who helped Troy would face consequences. He drove home with a can of gas for the generator and not much else. Hallie was on the porch when he pulled up. "How bad?" she asked. "Pretty bad. Hardware store won't sell to me. Feed store neither. Bank froze my account." "Can he do that? Just freeze your money?" "He owns the bank. He can do whatever he wants and justify it later." Hallie's face hardened. "So what do we do?" "We wait for the state investigators, and we find more evidence while we wait." "Where?" "We've searched everywhere." Troy thought about Samuel's statement. "I have hidden copies of financial records and correspondence in multiple locations." They'd found the lockbox in the cellar, the notarized statement in the barn foundation, and the letters in the root cellar wall. But Samuel had been thorough. There had to be more. "The house itself," Troy said. "We've searched the outbuildings, but not the house properly." They spent the afternoon taking the house apart, methodically checking every hiding place. Behind baseboards, under floorboards, in the attic, between wall studs where they could access them. Hours of work yielded nothing but dust and mouse droppings. Troy was about to give up when Hallie called from the kitchen. "Dad, this wall sounds different." She was tapping on the wall beside the old chimney. Most of the wall gave back a solid thunk, but one section sounded hollow. Troy examined it carefully. The plaster was original, painted over many times. But there, barely visible, was a seam. Someone had cut a section of the wall and replastered it. He fetched a hammer and carefully broke through the plaster. Behind it, in a cavity between the wall studs, was a metal box. Inside were financial records, ledgers showing the real cattle sales versus what Jacob had reported, receipts for expenses that had never been incurred, bank statements from an account in Jacob's name only, containing money that should have been partnership income. "This is what Samuel meant about documentation," Troy said, leafing through the pages. "These prove exactly how Jacob was stealing. Dates, amounts, methods." There was also a photograph. Samuel and a woman, younger than in the other photos Troy had seen. They were standing by the house, and the woman wore what looked like an engagement ring. Troy turned the photo over. In Samuel's handwriting, "Martha and me, August 1953. Wedding planned for November." Martha, the neighbor who'd warned him to let sleeping dogs lie. "Martha Sykes," Hallie said, reading over his shoulder. She was Samuel's fiancée. "She's been here the whole time, 70 years, watching the ranch fall apart, waiting." Troy stopped, understanding flooding through him. She knew all along. About Jacob, about the murder, everything. Why didn't she say anything? Fear, maybe. Or no proof, or... Another thought struck Troy. Or she was waiting for the right person to find what Samuel hid. He looked at the photo again. Martha had been young and beautiful, and in love with a man who'd been murdered before they could marry. She'd spent her entire life waiting, watching, hoping someone would eventually care enough to seek the truth. "We need to talk to her," Troy said. They drove to Martha's small house a mile down the road. She answered the door slowly, her face showing no surprise at seeing them. "You found more?" she said. Not a question. "The financial records and a photograph. You and Samuel." Martha's eyes filled with tears. She stepped aside to let them in. Her living room was sparse but neat. On the mantel, Troy saw more photographs. Samuel as a young man, Samuel in uniform, Samuel on the ranch. 70 years of keeping vigil for a man who'd never come home. "I knew you'd find it eventually," Martha said, settling into a chair. Samuel was thorough. He knew Jacob might kill him. He prepared. Why didn't you tell us from the start? Would you have believed an old woman's story? Or would you have thought I was crazy, still holding on to ancient grief? Martha shook her head. No, I needed you to find the evidence yourselves. Needed you to care enough to dig. You've known all along, Hallie said. About the murder, about everything. I suspected. Samuel came to me the night before he disappeared. Told me about the meeting at the well. Made me promise, if anything happened, to watch over the evidence he'd hidden. To wait for someone worthy to find it. 70 years, Troy said softly. 70 years I've kept that promise. Watched the ranch decay, watched the Miller family prosper on what they'd stolen. Waited for someone who'd give a damn about an old injustice. Martha looked at Troy. That's why I arranged for you to buy the place. You needed a second chance. Samuel needed justice. I thought maybe you could give each other what you needed. The pieces fell into place. The $1 listing, the specific timing. Martha had orchestrated everything. You own the ranch, Troy said. Martha smiled, thin and sad. Through a trust. I never claimed it openly. Jacob's people would have destroyed me, but I kept the tax payments current through intermediaries. Kept it available for when the right person came along. Why me? I researched you, saw a good man beaten down by betrayal trying to be better for his daughter. Saw someone who understood what Samuel went through. She looked at Hallie. And I saw a girl who needed her father to fight for something. You both deserved better than what life gave you. Troy felt manipulated and honored in equal measure. Martha had stage-managed this entire journey, but for the right reasons. Cole Miller knows we found the well, Troy said. He's already retaliating. Froze my bank account, blacklisted me with local businesses. He's afraid, Martha said. His whole empire is built on what Jacob stole. If the truth comes out, if the property seizure is proven fraudulent, the Miller family loses everything, reputation, wealth, power. Good, Hallie said fiercely. Martha reached into a drawer and pulled out a cassette tape, old and worn. Samuel gave me this the night before he died, his voice, describing everything, the threats, the meeting Jacob arranged, his fear that he wouldn't survive. I've kept it safe all these years, waiting for the right moment. She handed the tape to Troy. Evidence from beyond the grave, Samuel's own testimony preserved in magnetic oxide. There's more, Martha said. I know where Samuel's body is. I've always known. The words hung in the air between them. Martha's face was pale but determined, the face of someone who'd carried a terrible secret for so long that releasing it felt like surrender and relief in equal measure. You know where he is, Troy repeated. In the well where Jacob put him 70 years ago. Hallie leaned forward. How do you know? Martha's hands trembled in her lap. She folded them together, steadying herself. Because I was there, not when it happened, but after. Samuel came to me the night before the meeting. October 11th, 1953. He was frightened but determined. He showed me copies of all the evidence, the financial records, the threatening letters, everything. Made me promise that if something happened to him, I'd hold on to it. Wait for someone who could finish what he started. She stood, moving to a cabinet against the wall. From a locked drawer, she pulled out a small box. Inside were more photographs, letters in Samuel's handwriting, and a ring, an engagement ring set with a small diamond. We were going to be married that November, Martha said, touching the ring. Samuel wanted to clear everything up with Jacob first. Start our marriage with a clean slate. He thought Jacob might be reasonable if cornered with proof. I told him he was a fool, that Jacob would never admit to theft. But Samuel believed in doing things the right way, believed in fairness and justice. She sat back down, the ring still in her hand. He never came home from that meeting. I waited all morning, then all day. By evening I knew. I went to the sheriff, different man then, but just as useless. Told him Samuel had gone to meet Jacob Miller and hadn't returned. The sheriff talked to Jacob, came back, said Jacob claimed Samuel never showed up. Said there was no evidence of foul play, that Samuel had probably just run off. But you didn't believe it, Troy said. I knew Samuel. He wouldn't run, not from Jacob, not from his responsibilities, not from me. Martha's voice caught. 3 days later, late at night, I drove out to the old well. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. Or Samuel's ghost calling me. The area around the well had been disturbed. Fresh dirt, and the well that had been open was sealed with new concrete. Miller Construction, 1953, cast right into the cap. You knew he was down there, Hallie whispered. I knew. But what could I do? Tell the sheriff. He was in Jacob's pocket. Dig it up myself. A young woman against a powerful man. I would have ended up in that well too. Martha's eyes were dry but fierce. So I waited. I documented everything Samuel had hidden. I watched Jacob prosper on stolen wealth. I watched him die an old man, respected and honored, while Samuel rotted in that well. Why didn't you claim the property? Troy asked. If you were his fiancée. We married, Martha said quietly. 2 days before he confronted Jacob. We went to the state capitol, found a judge, made it legal. Samuel wanted me protected in case something happened. We were going to announce it after everything was settled with Jacob, but Samuel died before we could. She showed them the marriage certificate, faded but legal, dated October 9th, 1953. Legally, I inherited everything when Samuel died, but I couldn't claim it openly. Jacob had already started the process to seize the ranch for debts. If I'd come forward, he would have killed me too, or ruined me in ways that would have been worse than death. So I hid the certificate, maintained my maiden name, and watched from the shadows. You've owned the ranch all along, Troy said, understanding fully now. Through trusts and shell companies, yes. After Jacob sold it, I bought it back through intermediaries. Let it sit, let it decay. Waited. Martha looked at Troy. Waited for someone like you. Someone who'd lost everything to betrayal. Someone who'd understand what Samuel went through and care enough to fight. Troy felt the weight of manipulation settle on his shoulders, but he couldn't summon anger. Martha had orchestrated this, yes, but for justice, not personal gain. You researched me, he said. Knew about the divorce, the business, everything. I've spent 70 years watching for the right person. When I saw your listing inquiry, I investigated. Saw a good man destroyed by someone he trusted. Saw a father trying to give his daughter something better. You were perfect, desperate enough to take a $1 ranch, skilled enough to make something of it, and wronged enough to understand why an old injustice matters. You used us, Hallie said, but without heat. More like observation. I gave you a purpose, Martha corrected gently. You needed somewhere to go. I needed someone to care. Samuel needed justice. We all got something we needed. Troy stood, walking to the window. The prairie stretched out beyond Martha's small yard, empty and eternal. 70 years of waiting. 70 years of patient revenge. The scale of it was staggering. Cole Miller knows we're close, he said. He's already retaliating. He's terrified, Martha said. His grandfather built the Miller fortune on theft and murder. If that comes out, it destroys everything. The family name, their business empire, their standing in the community. Cole will do anything to protect that. What can he really do? Hallie asked. Martha's expression darkened. More than you think. The Millers have been consolidating power for 70 years. They own businesses, hold mortgages, control credit. Sheriff Breslin, his campaign was funded by Miller money. Half the county commission owes the family favors. You're fighting not just a man, but an entire system built to protect Miller interests. Then how do we win? Troy felt the odds stacking against them. With the truth. Martha pulled out the cassette tape again. Samuel's voice, recorded the night before he died, describing Jacob's threats, the planned meeting at the well, his fear that Jacob would kill him, combined with the physical evidence, the financial records, the threatening letters. It's enough to demand a proper investigation. Rebecca Chen already filed a complaint with the state attorney general. Good. The state can overrule local corruption. They'll have to excavate the well, examine what's there. Once they find Samuel's remains with all this evidence pointing to Jacob, Martha's voice hardened. Cole Miller can't fight truth backed by state authority. Troy took the cassette tape, feeling its weight. A dead man's testimony, preserved on magnetic oxide. Samuel Garrett speaking across 70 years, demanding justice. There's one more thing, Martha said. She pulled out a folder, passing it to Troy. Samuel's will, written 3 days before his death. He left everything to me, the ranch, his savings, his partnership share. Jacob had the ranch seized before I could claim it, but that seizure was fraudulent if the partnership theft can be proven. The mineral and water rights that Cole Miller claims, they should have been mine, passed through Samuel's estate. Troy looked through the will. Legal, notarized, Claire. If we prove the seizure was fraudulent, Rebecca had said, subsequent transfers of mineral and water rights could be challenged. This invalidates everything, Troy said slowly. The seizure, the auction sale to Jacob, the transfer of mineral rights, all of it. Cole Miller's empire is built on sand, Martha agreed. Once we prove Samuel was murdered and the property stolen, everything collapses. The mineral rights revert to Samuel's estate. To me, as his widow. The current value is over $600,000. Hallie looked between Troy and Martha. So you're not just seeking justice for Samuel. You're seeking to reclaim what was stolen. Both, Martha said simply. The money matters less than people knowing the truth. Samuel died fighting for what was right. He deserves to be remembered as a victim, not a thief who ran away. And Jacob Miller deserves to be remembered as a murderer, not a pillar of the community. Troy understood then the full scope of what they'd undertaken. This wasn't just solving a cold case. It was dismantling a family's legacy, rewriting local history, and destroying a power structure that had stood for 7 decades. They'll fight with everything they have, he said. Yes, Martha agreed. But we have something they don't. Truth and a record that can't be erased. Samuel made sure of that. He knew Jacob might kill him, so he created insurance. Evidence scattered across the property, duplicates in multiple locations, testimony preserved in multiple formats. He built a case that would survive him. And you've protected it for 70 years. Martha smiled, sad and fierce. I made a promise to my husband the night before he died. I told him I'd wait as long as it took, that someday someone would care enough to find what he'd hidden, that his name would be cleared and Jacob would face judgment, even if only in history. She looked at Troy. You're the answer to that promise. You and your daughter. You're going to finish what Samuel started. Troy felt the weight of responsibility settle on him. Not just to rebuild a ranch or give Hallie a home, but to be the instrument of justice for a man who died fighting for truth. We'll need to move fast, he said. Cole Miller won't wait for the state investigation. He'll escalate. Let him, Martha said. Every move he makes digs him deeper. Fear makes men stupid. Jacob learned that too late. His grandson's about to learn the same lesson. She stood, suddenly looking every year of her age. I'm dying, Mr. Mallin. Cancer. 3 months, maybe 4. I need to see this finished before I go. Need to stand over that well when they bring Samuel's body up. Need to know he's finally free and Jacob's name is ruined. We'll finish it, Troy promised. Martha smiled. I know you will. That's why I chose you. The cassette tape was older than Troy, a relic from an era when people recorded their voices on magnetic oxide and hoped the technology would outlast their secrets. He held it carefully, aware he was holding the last words of a dead man. I need to hear it, he said. Martha had a cassette player, dusty but functional. She inserted the tape with trembling hands and pressed play. The speakers crackled, then Samuel Garrett's voice filled the small living room. Martha, if you're hearing this, I'm gone. Jacob killed me or I'm running scared, but either way, I want you to know what happened and why. The voice was steady, determined, touched with fear but not overwhelmed by it. A man facing death who wanted his story told. Jacob Miller has been stealing from our partnership since day one. I have proof. Financial records, showing where the money went, threatening letters he sent when I got close to exposing him. Tomorrow morning I'm meeting him at the old well. He says we can settle this like men. I think he means to kill me. A pause, breath drawn and released. I've hidden evidence all over the ranch. The lockbox in the root cellar has my journal and the threatening letters. The barn foundation has my notarized statement. The house wall near the chimney has the financial records. If I don't come back, Martha, wait for someone who'll care, someone who understands what it means to be betrayed by someone you trusted. Give them the evidence and let them finish this. Another pause, longer this time. I love you. We'll have that November wedding, or I'll be waiting for you on the other side. But either way, don't let Jacob win. Don't let him prosper while I'm forgotten. Promise me, Martha. Promise. The tape hissed into silence. Martha's face was wet with tears, but she sat straight, dignified even in grief. I promised, she said, and I kept my promise. Troy and Hallie drove home in silence, the weight of Samuel's voice hanging over them. Back at the ranch, Troy called Rebecca Chen. We have more evidence, he said. A lot more, and we have Samuel Garrett's widow. She's been protecting his evidence for 70 years. Rebecca drove out that evening. Troy, Hallie, and Martha laid out everything, the marriage certificate, the will, the cassette tape, the complete documentation of Jacob's theft. Rebecca listened to the tape twice, making notes. When it finished the second time, she sat back. This is extraordinary. With Samuel's testimony, the physical evidence, and Martha as the legal heir, we have grounds to challenge everything. The property seizure, the mineral rights transfers, all of it. How do we proceed? Troy asked. I've already filed the complaint with the State Attorney General. This new evidence accelerates everything. I'll send them copies tonight. Request immediate investigation, excavation of the well site, full forensic analysis. Rebecca looked at Martha. You'll need to be prepared to testify. Your relationship to Samuel, the evidence you've protected, all of it. I'm ready, Martha said. I've been ready for 70 years. What about Cole Miller? Hallie asked. He's not going to just sit back while we destroy his family. No, Rebecca agreed. In fact, I'd expect him to escalate. He knows we're close. He's probably already lawyered up, preparing his defense. As if summoned by her words, Troy's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Last chance. Leave town by Friday or face consequences. Your daughter's future is at stake. Troy showed it to Rebecca. Her jaw tightened. That's witness intimidation. I'm reporting this. Will it matter? It creates a record. If anything happens to you, there's evidence of threats. Rebecca looked at Troy seriously. But Mr. Mallin, you need to understand. Cole Miller is desperate. Desperate men do dangerous things. You and Hallie should consider staying somewhere else until the state investigators arrive. I'm not running, Troy said. Dad, Hallie started. We've run enough. From Omaha, from the divorce, from everything. This is our home now. We're not leaving it. That night, Troy couldn't sleep. He walked the property, checking the doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. The prairie night was dark and vast, full of wind and distant coyote calls. He thought about Samuel Garrett walking this same land 70 years ago, knowing he might die, choosing to face his enemy anyway. There was courage in that choice, and foolishness too, but also dignity, the kind that comes from standing up for what's right even when the cost is everything. Around 2 a.m., Troy heard an engine. He moved to the window and saw lights on the access road. Not coming toward the house, but heading toward the well site. He woke Hallie, then called Rebecca and Martha. "Something's happening at the well. Trucks, lights." "I'm calling the sheriff," Rebecca said. "The sheriff's in Miller's pocket." "Then I'm calling the state police. Don't approach alone. Wait for help." But Troy couldn't wait. He grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the well, Hallie insisting on coming with him. They approached carefully, staying low. 3 trucks were parked near the well site, and men with equipment were working by portable lights. Troy recognized one of them, Cole Miller, directing the operation. They were excavating the well. No, not excavating, covering it more thoroughly. A cement truck was there, and men were preparing to pour fresh concrete over the old cap. "They're destroying the evidence," Hallie whispered. Troy pulled out his phone and started recording. The men worked quickly, professionally. Within 20 minutes, they'd poured new concrete over the entire well site, sealing it under 2 feet of fresh cement. Cole Miller watched the work with grim satisfaction. Then, as if sensing watchers, he turned toward where Troy and Hallie hid. "I know you're out there, Mallin," he called into the darkness, "and I know what you're thinking, but that well is on my mineral rights property, and I have every legal right to seal abandoned water sources for safety reasons. By the time your investigators get their paperwork processed, this concrete will be cured. Good luck proving what's underneath." He climbed into his truck, and the convoy pulled away, leaving the well site transformed. Where the old cap had been visible, now there was only fresh concrete, smooth and featureless. Troy stood, staring at what they'd done. 70 years, and Samuel's grave had finally been found, only to be sealed again by the murderer's grandson. "They can still excavate it," Hallie said, but her voice was uncertain. Troy's phone rang. Rebecca, calling back. "The state police are sending someone, but it'll be a few hours. I contacted the Attorney General's office. They're expediting the investigation, but it still takes time to get people mobilized." "What's happening there?" Troy explained what he'd witnessed. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. "That's destruction of evidence, obstruction of justice. It actually helps our case, shows consciousness of guilt, but it also means we need to move faster. Cole Miller is willing to break laws to protect his family secrets." "How much faster can we move?" "I'm driving to the state capitol first thing tomorrow morning. I'll personally deliver all our evidence to the Attorney General's office, push for emergency action, the tape, the documents, Martha's testimony. It's enough to justify immediate investigation." After the call ended, Troy and Hallie walked back to the house. Martha was waiting on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the night chill. "They sealed it again," Troy told her. Martha nodded slowly. "Jacob did the same thing 70 years ago, tried to hide his crime under concrete, but Samuel prepared for that. The well is evidence, but it's not the only evidence. Even if they never excavate it, we can prove what happened." "Will the state investigators believe us?" "They will when they hear Samuel's voice, when they see the financial records and the threatening letters, when I testify as his widow." Martha's voice was steel wrapped in frailty. "Cole Miller has underestimated us. His grandfather made the same mistake with Samuel. Powerful men always think force and money can bury truth. They're always wrong." The next morning, Martha, Troy, and Hallie drove to the state capitol with Rebecca. It was a 4-hour drive, giving them time to organize their presentation. At the Attorney General's office, they met with a senior investigator named David Walsh. 50s, serious-faced, with the bearing of someone who'd seen everything and believed nothing until proven. Rebecca laid out the case systematically. The timeline of events, the partnership theft, the threatening letters, Samuel's taped testimony. the marriage certificate proving Martha's legal standing, the will that should have transferred everything to her, the fraudulent seizure and sale. Walsh listened without interrupting, making notes. When Rebecca finished, he turned to Martha. "Mrs. Garrett. And you are legally Mrs. Garrett, I see from the certificate. You've held on to this evidence for 70 years. Why now? Why not come forward earlier?" Martha met his gaze steadily. Fear, initially. Jacob Miller had power and connections. He'd already murdered one person. I was a young woman alone. Later, it became about waiting for the right moment, the right person. Someone who'd care enough to see it through. And Mr. Mallin is that person. He understands betrayal. Understands what it means to lose everything to someone you trusted. He has the integrity Samuel had. The kind that won't let injustice stand, even when it's easier to look away. Walsh turned to Troy. "You bought this property for $1. Some might say you have a financial motive here. The mineral rights are worth substantial money." "I didn't know about any of that when I bought the place," Troy said. "I was just looking for somewhere cheap to start over. The evidence I found, the story I uncovered, that happened after. And yes, maybe there's money involved, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here because Samuel Garrett deserves justice, because his name deserves to be cleared, because truth matters." Walsh studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you. And based on the evidence presented, I'm recommending immediate action. We'll get a court order to excavate the well site, regardless of Mr. Miller's recent concrete work. We'll conduct a full forensic investigation, and we'll examine the property seizure and subsequent transfers for fraud." "How long will this take?" Martha asked. "With the urgency of the case and the quality of evidence, we can move quickly. Court order within 48 hours, excavation within a week, preliminary findings within 2 weeks. Martha's face showed relief and exhaustion. "That's all I ask, just long enough to see Samuel brought home." Walsh assured them he'd move with all possible speed. As they left the building, Troy felt something shift. The machinery of justice, slow and bureaucratic, had finally engaged. Now it was just a matter of time. But Cole Miller wouldn't wait quietly for that time to run out. The court order came through in 36 hours. By the third day, state investigators were on site with ground-penetrating radar, excavation equipment, and forensic specialists. Cole Miller tried to block them with legal injunctions, claiming the excavation violated his mineral rights. His attorneys filed emergency motions, demanded hearings, deployed every delaying tactic they could think of. But the Attorney General's office had moved fast and built an airtight warrant. The excavation proceeded. Troy, Hallie, and Martha stood at a distance, watching the investigators work. The fresh concrete Cole had poured was broken up and removed, revealing the old 1953 cap beneath. That too was carefully dismantled, documented, photographed from every angle. The well itself was 40 feet deep, according to the old survey maps. Too deep to have been used for water. Wells that deep in this area would hit only salt water and minerals. It had been dug for something else, or repurposed for something darker. The lead investigator, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, supervised the excavation with meticulous care. Every bucket of material brought up was sifted and examined. Every layer documented. On the second day of excavation, they found bones. Human remains, preserved by the dry conditions and sealed environment. A skeleton collapsed at the bottom of the well, along with personal effects. A wallet, a belt buckle, fragments of clothing, and a gold signet ring, tarnished but intact, with the initials ACE-G. Martha made a sound, half sob, half sigh, and Troy caught her as her knees buckled. 70 years of wondering, of knowing but not knowing, finally resolved into certainty. "That's Samuel's ring," she said through tears. "His father gave it to him. He wore it every day." Dr. Chen approached them, her expression professional but kind. "Mrs. Garrett, I'm sorry for your loss, The medical examiner will conduct a full analysis, but preliminary examination shows evidence of blunt force trauma to the skull. This appears to be a homicide. Martha nodded, unable to speak. Troy held her steady, Hallie on her other side. Sheriff Breslin had arrived, looking uncomfortable and angry. He stood with Cole Miller and Miller's attorney, watching the excavation with undisguised hostility. "This proves nothing," the attorney said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "A body in a well doesn't prove who put it there or when." "The concrete cap is dated 1953, Dr. Chen replied calmly. "The remains are consistent with that time period, and we found this." She held up an evidence bag containing a pocket watch, still in remarkable condition. The same watch Troy had found in the cellar, the same inscription. SG to JM, brothers in arms. "This watch was reported found on the property," Dr. Chen continued. "Apparently, there were two. One that fell during the crime, one that went into the well with the victim. Both linked Samuel Garrett to Jacob Miller on the day of his death." Cole Miller's face had gone pale. His attorney whispered urgently to him, but Cole just stared at the evidence being documented, catalogued, and preserved. "My grandfather didn't kill anyone," Cole said, but his voice lacked conviction. "This is circumstantial. Coincidence. Combined with the threatening letters your grandfather sent," Dr. Chen said, "the documented theft from the business partnership, and Mr. Garrett's recorded testimony describing his fear of your grandfather, it's far more than coincidence." She nodded to two state troopers who'd been standing by. "Cole Miller, you're being arrested for destruction of evidence and obstruction of justice. The concrete you poured was a deliberate attempt to hide a crime scene." "You can't," Cole started. "We can," one of the troopers said, producing handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." Troy watched as Cole Miller was led away, still protesting, his attorney hurrying alongside. The man who'd threatened Troy, frozen his bank account, blacklisted him throughout the county, reduced to just another criminal in custody. Sheriff Breslin looked like he wanted to object, but knew better. His own involvement with the Miller family was about to become very relevant to investigators. As the day wore on, more evidence emerged from the well. Fragments of a briefcase, water-damaged papers that might once have been documents, everything carefully preserved, catalogued, destined for forensic analysis. Martha stood vigil the entire time, refusing to leave even when exhaustion made her sway. Troy brought her water, a chair, but she barely seemed to notice. Her eyes were fixed on the well, watching them bring Samuel home piece by piece. 70 years, she said softly. 70 years he's been down there, in the dark, alone. Not alone, Hallie said gently. You've been here the whole time, waiting, watching, keeping his memory alive. Martha smiled through tears. I kept my promise. He can rest now. As sunset painted the prairie gold and crimson, the excavation paused for the day. The remains had been recovered, evidence collected, the site secured. Tomorrow they'd continue searching for any additional evidence in the well's depths. But the essential truth had been established. Samuel Garrett hadn't run away. He'd been murdered, hidden, forgotten by everyone except the woman who'd loved him. Until now. Until Troy Mallin had bought a ranch for $1 and decided that old injustices still mattered. The forensic analysis took 2 weeks. Dr. Chen's team worked methodically, piecing together what had happened in October 1953. The medical examiner's report was conclusive. Blunt force trauma to the back of the skull, consistent with being struck from behind with a heavy object. Death would have been nearly instantaneous. Samuel Garrett had been murdered. The timeline investigators reconstructed matched Samuel's taped testimony perfectly. He'd gone to meet Jacob Miller at the well. Jacob had attacked him from behind, killed him, and dropped his body down the shaft. Within days, Jacob had sealed the well with concrete, marking it with his company's name in an act of either arrogance or dark humor. But the physical evidence was only part of the story. Rebecca Chen had been working another angle, the financial trail. The property seizure was completely fraudulent, she explained at a meeting in her office. Troy, Hallie, and Martha sat across from her as she laid out documents. Jacob Miller created false debts, forged Samuel's signature on loan documents, and used his position on the county commission to fast-track the seizure. The auction was a sham. He was the only bidder because he'd warned off everyone else. "Can you prove it?" Troy asked. Bank records from 1954 show payments from Jacob to the county clerk, who processed the seizure. Payments to the judge who approved it. Payments to the auctioneer who conducted the sale. It was a coordinated conspiracy, and Jacob was stupid enough to document it. Martha leaned forward. "What does that mean for the property?" "It means the seizure is void. The ranch should never have been taken from Samuel's estate, which means it should have passed to you as his widow, which means every subsequent sale and transfer of the property, including the mineral and water rights, is invalid." "All of it?" Hallie asked. "All of it. Miller Resources LLC's claims to those rights are based on a fraudulent foundation. The rights should revert to Samuel Garrett's estate, to Martha." Troy watched Martha absorb this. 70 years of waiting, vindicated. Not just justice for Samuel's murder, but restoration of what had been stolen. "I don't want the money," Martha said quietly. "I never cared about that." "You should care," Rebecca said gently. "It's what Samuel would have wanted. For you to be taken care of. For his legacy to benefit someone he loved." The legal battles that followed were complex but decisive. Cole Miller's attorneys fought hard, but the evidence was overwhelming. The murder weapon, a heavy pipe wrench marked with Jacob Miller's company logo, had been recovered from the well along with Samuel's remains. DNA evidence, though degraded by time, confirmed the blood on it matched Samuel Garrett. Historical documents proved the financial conspiracy. Witness statements from descendants of people who'd known both men corroborated the timeline. Samuel's taped testimony, played in court, was devastating in its simple honesty. The court ruled that the 1954 seizure had been procured through fraud. All subsequent transfers of the property and its rights were voided. The ranch, the mineral rights, and the water claims reverted to Samuel Garrett's estate. As his legal widow, Martha inherited everything. Cole Miller was convicted of evidence destruction and obstruction of justice. His business empire, built on foundations of fraud and murder, collapsed. The bank was seized by federal regulators. Miller Resources was dissolved. The family name, honored for 70 years, became synonymous with corruption. Sheriff Breslin resigned before he could be removed, his connections to the Miller family finally exposed. A new sheriff was appointed, one without ties to old corruption. The town of Ashford, confronted with the truth of its own history, had to reckon with decades of honoring a murderer. Jacob Miller's name was removed from buildings and parks. His contributions to the community, bought with stolen wealth, were reassessed. Through it all, Martha remained focused on one thing: giving Samuel a proper burial. The funeral was held on a clear November morning, exactly 70 years after their planned wedding date. Martha had arranged everything: the casket, the service, the gravesite on the ranch where Samuel had lived and died. The turnout surprised Troy. People from the community who'd learned the truth, who wanted to pay respects to a man who'd been wrongly maligned for generations. Descendants of people who'd known Samuel, who'd always wondered about his disappearance. Martha stood straight and dignified throughout the service, Troy and Hallie on either side of her. When the pastor invited her to speak, she stepped forward. "Samuel Garrett was a good man," she said, her voice carrying across the assembled mourners. "He believed in fairness, in justice, in doing the right thing, even when it cost him everything. He was stolen from me, from all of us, by a man who chose greed over honor. But Samuel's truth survived. His voice, recorded on tape, spoke across 70 years. His evidence, hidden carefully, waited for someone to care enough to find it. She looked at Troy. Mr. Mallin, you came to this ranch broken and looking for a fresh start. Instead, you found a purpose. You finished what Samuel started. You gave him justice and gave me closure. Thank you. Troy felt tears on his face and didn't try to hide them. He'd come here for survival. He'd found something better. Redemption, purpose, and a chance to make a real difference. As they lowered Samuel Garrett's casket into the ground, Martha placed a single rose on the lid. Rest now, my love, she whispered. It's finished. 3 months after Samuel's funeral, the prairie showed the first signs of spring. Green shoots pushed through winter-brown grass, and the wind carried warmth instead of cutting cold. Troy stood on the porch of the ranch house, surveying the transformation. New roof, repaired siding, fresh paint on the trim. The barn had been stabilized, its frame reinforced. Fences ran straight and true along property lines. The place looked like someone cared about it again, because someone did. Martha had passed away 6 weeks after the funeral, peacefully in her sleep. She'd held on just long enough to see Samuel properly buried and justice finally served. In her will, she'd left the ranch and all its rights to Troy, with one condition: that it be called the Garrett-Mallin Ranch, honoring both the man who'd built it and the man who'd saved it. Troy had accepted, though the magnitude of the gift still took his breath away. The mineral and water rights alone were worth over $600,000. Properly managed, they'd provide income for years. Security for Hallie's future, stability Troy had never thought he'd have again. But more than the money, Martha had given him purpose. She'd orchestrated his arrival, yes, but she'd also seen something in him worth saving. A good man beaten down who needed a reason to stand up again. The sound of a car engine pulled Troy from his thoughts. Hallie's used Honda, bought with a loan Troy had finally been able to secure from a bank not owned by the Millers, pulled into the drive. She'd been in town, meeting with her college advisor. She climbed out, waving a folder. I got in. Full scholarship to Kansas State. Engineering program. Troy felt pride swell in his chest. That's wonderful, sweetheart. They said my essay made the difference. Hallie came up on the porch, sitting beside him. The one about you. About integrity and standing up for what's right even when everyone tells you to quit. You wrote about me. About us. About what we did here. About how losing everything taught us what actually matters. She looked out at the ranch. A year ago, I hated you. Thought you were a failure who'd ruined our lives. Now I think you're the bravest person I know. Troy put his arm around his daughter, and she leaned into him the way she used to when she was small. Your mother called yesterday, Troy said. Wants to visit, see the ranch. What did you tell her? That she's welcome. This is your home and she's your mother. Whatever happened between us, that doesn't change. Hallie was quiet for a moment. She apologized, in her last email. Said she handled the divorce badly, that she let her lawyer push things too far. She's with someone new now, seemed happier. Good, that's good. Do you still hate her? Troy thought about that. A year ago, the answer would have been yes, absolutely. But now, having fought a real enemy, having seen what true evil looked like, Linda seemed more like someone who'd been unhappy and handled it poorly. Human, flawed, but not monstrous. No, he said. I don't hate her. I don't even blame her, really. We both made mistakes. We both could have done better. Rebecca Chen drove up as they sat there, getting out with a folder of her own. She'd become a friend over the months, beyond just being their attorney. Got the final settlement papers, she said, joining them on the porch. The state has officially transferred all of Samuel Garrett's assets to his estate, which you now control as Martha's designated heir. The mineral rights, water claims, everything. You're looking at about $650,000 in total value, plus this property. Troy signed where she indicated, still amazed by the reversal of fortune. A year ago, he'd had $9,000 and a failing life. Now he had land, resources, and a future. "What are you going to do with it?" Rebecca asked. "Keep the ranch. Make it productive again. Maybe cattle. Maybe something else. Use the mineral rights income for Hallie's education and to build something sustainable." Troy looked at the barn. "And I'm going to hire local people. Pay fair wages. Be the kind of employer Samuel would have been. Build something honest." "Samuel would like that," Rebecca said. That evening, Troy walked out to the two graves on the eastern part of the property. Samuel and Martha, buried side by side as they should have been 70 years ago. Troy had installed a simple granite marker. Samuel Garrett, 1922-1953. Beloved husband, honest man, Martha Garrett, 1931-2025. Beloved wife, faithful heart, truth delayed is not truth denied. Troy stood there in the fading light, feeling the presence of the two people who'd changed his life without meaning to. They'd given him more than property. They'd given him a mission, a purpose, and a path back to being the man he wanted to be. "Thank you," he said aloud to the graves, "for trusting me, for giving me a chance when I didn't deserve one, for showing me that it's never too late to stand up for what's right." The wind moved through the prairie grass, carrying the scent of spring and new growth. Back at the house, Troy and Hallie made dinner together, a routine they'd developed over the months. They talked about her college plans, about the ranch's future, about small things that mattered, because they were sharing them. After dinner, they sat on the porch and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. The ranch sign they'd installed together swayed gently in the breeze. Garrett Mallin Ranch, Estor, 1951, restored 2024. "Dad," Hallie said as darkness fell, "do you think we would have been okay if we hadn't found the lockbox? If this had just been about rebuilding the ranch?" Troy considered that. "I don't know. Maybe. But I think we needed something bigger than ourselves to work toward. Something that mattered beyond just surviving. We saved his name, Samuel's. People know the truth now. Yeah, we did that." They sat in comfortable silence as stars emerged, the prairie vast and peaceful around them. Troy thought about the journey that had brought them here. Betrayal and loss transformed into purpose and redemption. Not the path he'd have chosen, but the one he needed. A year ago, he'd bought an abandoned ranch for $1, desperate and defeated, with no plan beyond getting through one more day. Now he had a home, a restored relationship with his daughter, and the knowledge that he'd made a real difference in the world. Samuel Garrett's legacy lived on. Martha's 7-decade vigil had been honored. And Troy Mallin, failed businessman, divorced father, broken man, had found his way back to wholeness by fighting for someone else's justice. The ranch house lights glowed warm against the darkness. Inside, it was no longer just shelter. It was home. Real home, earned through struggle and sacrifice and standing up when it would have been easier to walk away. Troy stood, Hallie beside him, and they went inside to a future that felt, for the first time in a long time, genuinely hopeful. The ghosts had been laid to rest. The truth had been told, and what remained was the simple, difficult, beautiful work of building a life worth living. The door closed behind them, and the Garrett Mallin Ranch settled into the quiet of a prairie night, its secrets finally told, its honor finally restored.